Thanks very much indeed, Jimmy. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm really pleased to say I'm joined on this call by the Mayor of West Yorkshire, Tracy Brabin, Mayor of Liverpool City Region, Steve Rotherham, Mayor of North of Tyne, Jamie Driscoll, Mayor Dan Jarvis, South Yorkshire, and Mayor Dan Norris. We all have concerns about the government's plans for the relaxation of the wearing of face coverings on public transport. It's important to stress, though, that we do support the need to reopen our city regions, our economies, and return to a more normal life. But we need to do that as safely as we can, respecting the views of all of our residents. We are still in a pandemic, and we need to think in terms of collective safety rather than individual freedom or personal responsibility. We take decisions not just for ourselves, and it's not just our own health we impact when we take a decision. It is, of course, more than that. It's the health of others, particularly when we're in enclosed spaces like public transport, where some people have no choice but to go because public transport is their only option. Masks protect others in these environments, and one person's choice not to wear one on a bus or a tram could affect the physical and mental health of passengers nearby, particularly those who are clinically extremely vulnerable. As we move towards the 19th of July, I have been struck by the number of concerns from people who are clinically vulnerable, who feel they will be more at risk on transport from next week or forced off it altogether. We do not believe that they should be put in that position. So from Monday, here in Greater Manchester, we will continue to require the wearing of face coverings on all Metrolink services using the conditions of carriage. In effect, this will be a continuation of the current position. Unlike the Mayor of London, we do not have the same powers over buses and trains, but we believe the requirement on our trams will help increase the use of face coverings on other transport modes. Given the practical challenges of this and the period that we're moving into, particularly the enforcement challenges, we will keep the situation under review. We remain of the view that the best solution is for the government to maintain a requirement of face coverings on all modes of public transport, and we call on them, even at this stage, to return to that position. But in the absence of that, we are asking the people of Greater Manchester to work with us, and by doing so, protect the health of our fellow citizens, particularly those who have health vulnerabilities. And if we wear face coverings and we make that decision as a city region ourselves, taking this step, what we will be doing is, of course, supporting members of the community who will feel more worried come Monday. We will together be giving them the confidence to continue to be able to go about their lives, and in some cases, go to essential appointments at hospitals or do their shopping. This is about all of us here in Greater Manchester continuing to work together to get through the pandemic. And I hope the people of this city region will support the decision that I have made in consultation with our leaders. With that, I will now hand over to Mayor Tracy Brabin. Tracy.
Thank you so much, Andy. And certainly one of my priorities as the Mayor of West Yorkshire is to keep the people of West Yorkshire safe, which is why today I mandated the use of face coverings in bus stations across West Yorkshire from Monday. I really hope this is going to give encouragement to the vulnerable, those potentially who are attending chemotherapy sessions at local hospitals, to encourage them to continue to travel on our networks. We really have come so far, and we want to continue the great work. Even though our case numbers are rising, we have to make sure that people are kept safe. I'd like to go further. I'd like to include buses and trains, but we can only do what's in our power. So I'm urging our West Yorkshire communities to continue to wear face coverings on every public transport network. We know that the YouGov poll recently done has said that 71% of the public would be happy and content using face coverings going forward. So I'm asking the government, please listen to the public and put the vulnerable first. It's the government that have this power to mandate face masks across all transport networks, and I'd support them to make this decision as restrictions lift from Monday. And we know the vaccination rollout is impressive and potentially the light at the end of the tunnel, but we certainly have further to go, and we can't afford to loosen our grip on this virus across West Yorkshire. So it's not too late. So I'm appealing to government to what I think is to do the right thing and to change this agreement. Listen to our concerns, put the people of West Yorkshire and the rest of the country, their safety first. It's so frustrating that we don't have all the powers needed to protect the people we represent, but we're doing what we can with the powers that we have. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Steve Rotherham.
Thanks, Tracy. If ever there was an example of the fragmented nature of public transport in this country, then current government policy on face coverings illustrates it perfectly, not just within the regions represented today, but across the whole country too. And the fact is that we have 6 metro mayors here, all with different powers, and none of us are able to do what the Mayor of London has done. In April 2020, it was myself and Sadiq Khan who were the first politicians to call for face coverings on public transport. The government refused to back us on face masks. They were wrong then, and they're wrong again now. In fact, the Prime Minister, who likes to talk about personal responsibility, which in all honesty is a bit rich coming from him and his government, but he doesn't talk about collective responsibility, which is the same collective good we've all played our part in over the last year and a bit. So he does know the right thing to do, but he's scared of the reaction from his own backbenchers. What happened to following the science, Prime Minister? Now you just watch. They'll try to shift the blame onto ordinary people when infection rates start to rise again. The same public, the same ordinary people who are overwhelmingly, as you've just heard from Tracy, in favour of face masks on public transport now. And as Andy said, these are the same ordinary people who might have no choice but to get a bus or a train into work, and whose safety might now be compromised. If I did have control over the whole public transport network, like Sadiq does in London, I'd do what he has already done. But the truth is I don't. I haven't got the same powers. Instead, I'm trying to make wearing face masks mandatory on the bits of the network that I can. But in all honesty, I'm hitting brick walls with our bus and train operators. Sadly, we do need the cooperation of private operators to help us keep our people safe. And I'll be asking all of them, Stagecoach, Arriva, Merseyrail, especially TPE, Avanti and Northern, which the government now runs, by the way, to do the right thing. I don't think that we can put a price on public safety, and wearing face masks costs nothing really. It doesn't damage businesses. In fact, if anything, it helps them by building public confidence in the transport system. And it really is a minor inconvenience that we're now asking people to stop the spread of the virus any further. So my plea to government is show your commitment to levelling up by giving local areas the power we need to be able to run our own transport networks in the interests of local people, their safety and their health. And with that, I'll hand it over to Jamie Driscoll, who's the Mayor of the North of Tyne.
Thanks, Steve. COVID is still a dangerous disease. The bodies might not be piling high in the thousands, but 213 people died last week. Thousands of people are suffering from long COVID, tens of thousands having to self-isolate. So the government's decision to abandon measures to limit its spread is a dereliction of duty. Every single public health official agrees that mask wearing reduces the spread of COVID, so the government must reverse their position and make mask wearing on public transport compulsory. Wearing a mask is a minor inconvenience. We've all got masks, we're used to wearing them. And the point of wearing a mask is not just to keep yourself safe, it's to keep other people safe. We wouldn't make obeying the speed limit voluntary. Minimising the spread of COVID should not be voluntary. On the Tyne-and-Wear Metro, we will use the conditions of carriage to keep mask wearing compulsory, but transport devolution in this country is so haphazard that I have no control over buses or local rail services, and that is something we need to fix. People who have to use the bus or metro to get to work have no choice. Bus drivers and metro drivers, well, they can hardly be expected to stop the vehicle, get out the cab and enforce mask wearing. It's the government's job to keep us safe, and they've got to stop passing the buck. And as for the people of our region, please wear your mask, look after each other, and get your vaccines if you haven't yet. I'll hand over to Dan Jarvis.
Thanks very much, Jamie. It's a pleasure to join my fellow Metro mayors. We've been working very closely together on this and other issues, and I'm really pleased that we've been able to reach a common position. In South Yorkshire, we've decided that we'll make face coverings mandatory at the bus stations we control right across our region from Monday. Now, a national mandate from the government would no doubt be less confusing for passengers and I'm sure more effective. But if they're unwilling to act, and they seem to be, then alongside the other mayors, I'll do what I can with the powers that I have to protect my constituents right across my region. I think it is worth reminding ourselves why we wear masks. We wear masks to protect each other from the virus, and the mixed messages from the government risks making public transport a no-go area, both for the vulnerable and for our young people who haven't yet had both vaccinations. I don't think that's on, and that's why, along with my fellow mayors, we're taking action in South Yorkshire. I'd now like to hand over to my colleague, Mayor Dan Norris from the South West. Dan.
On mute, Dan.
Dan, you're still on mute.
Sorry about that. I'll start again. I have no powers to mandate mask wearing, I'm afraid, and if I could, I really would do that. And covering up is vital for the future recovery in the west of England and getting people here back to normal. I've written to the Prime Minister today because I feel this is a ridiculous mismatch of rules right across the UK. My constituents get on buses and trains from the west of England to Wales and London every single day, and yet when they get off at the other end, there'll be completely different rules. It's too confusing. It's not safe because of the confusion. But I'm going to do the next best thing I can, which is launch a campaign to encourage mask wearing here in the west of England, even if the government are not prepared to take control properly and lead like they should. The only thing I can do, I feel, to restore confidence among an anxious public where the national government is not taking ownership is to do what I can do. But I'm afraid there aren't the powers and it's absolutely nonsensical and crazy that people should be made unsure and uncertain at such an important time during the pandemic.
Jimmy, would you like to take us through any questions from colleagues from the media?
Thank you, Andy. So at this point, can I ask colleagues from broadcast television first, because I'm conscious of the evening news bulletin soon. So broadcast television first, please, just to raise your hands to indicate you'd like to ask a question. I'll just give you a moment to do that. Thank you. Thank you. So what I'll do is I'll unmute one of you in a second and ask you to introduce yourself and where you're from, and also who you'd like to ask your question to, please. So, but 1 second. Okay, can we start first, please, with Harry Horton from ITV. Harry, you should be able to unmute your microphone now. Introduce yourself, where you're from, and who you'd like to ask a question to, please.
Yeah, thank you. Harry Horton from ITV Calendar in Yorkshire. My question to Tracy Brabin and Dan Jarvis as well. You talk about mixed messages from the government. Isn't there a risk here that by introducing this policy, you're creating even more confusion for the public? You've got the slightly ridiculous situation now where it's the law to wear a face covering in a bus station, but then when you get on the bus, it's not the law to wear a face mask. So just about that slightly confusing message, and whether people will be able to understand this sort of patchwork of policies.
Well, what I'm hoping, Harry, is that this event proves that actually we have a clearer messaging, that if you are on public transport, you are going to be really encouraged, whether that's by the operators, the bus operators, whether that's by me in bus stations, or whether that's by operators and when you're on rail networks, to please wear a mask. It makes sense. And let's not forget, this isn't necessarily, I've been double jabbed, but I wear a mask, not necessarily for me, but for others, and to provide reassurance and support for those most vulnerable, because it's really important that we don't then send people who've been shielding for nearly 15 months. And let's not forget, in West Yorkshire, we've really have had a massive impact. We've been in restrictions for most of the time. Those who've been shielding are now looking at shielding again, because they can't be certain when they go on public transport that they're going to be safe. So I'm hoping this event actually will clear things up, that most people will understand, for the greater good, with the empathy and with compassion for others, that it makes sense to wear a mask.
Thank you. Was it a question for Dan as well that you asked, Harry?
Yeah, just the same question to Dan, really, just about whether, you know, this might be slightly confusing for people in South Yorkshire.
Yeah, thanks very much, Harry. Look, I completely agree with what Tracy has just said. The confusion is arising because of the actions of national government. And actually what we're seeking to do is provide some clarity at a local level. But you're right to point out that there will potentially be a mismatch from what we're talking about, which is the mandating of face coverings in bus stations. But at the same time, of course, some of us don't have the powers to mandate our commuters or our passengers to wear face coverings when they're actually on public transport, so the buses and the trains. As other colleagues have already referred to, there are ongoing conversations with the operators, and I hope that they will listen to the call that we're making collectively and actually take a view which is based upon common sense. When I've had conversations with people locally, as I have been doing in recent days, I think most people think that actually it is a very small ask to continue doing what nearly all of us have been doing for some considerable period of time. So I hope that our actions will seek to provide some clarity where currently there isn't a huge amount, and I hope that the operators will listen carefully to what we've been saying and actually support the call we're making to make things even less confusing by actually mandating passengers to wear face coverings when they're on buses and trains.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Harry, for your question. Next, I'm just going to allow the mic of Eunice Muller. Eunice, you should be able to unmute yourself now. If you could introduce yourself, where you're from, and who you want to ask your question to, please.
Thanks, Jamie. Hello, it's Eunice Muller from Northwest Tonight, BBC News in Salford. My first question is to Andy. Last week, Andy, you could have done what you've said you're going to do now, but you said it would lead to confusion. What's changed? What's changed your mind? And my second question is to Steve Rotherham. Steve, how frustrating has it been for you not to convince private operators to go along with this requirement of wearing face masks?
Thanks, Eunice. So when we originally looked at it following the government's announcement last week, I did say that I thought this was going to be difficult to do, and that was our initial position. But obviously, if you do the job that I do, or any of the other excellent mayors on this call today, you're doing the job probably if you're listening to people, and particularly listening to people who are most at risk still during this pandemic. And I've been hearing their voices loud and clear, Eunice. I've been inundated with messages actually from people saying how the July the 19th for them wouldn't be Freedom Day, it would be Fear Day. And they would be forced off public transport, even forced to shield. I mean, there's shielding, well, sorry, there is advice gone to people who are clinically extremely vulnerable, saying to them that they should avoid unvaccinated people. Well, how on earth are they meant to know, you know, who is vaccinated and who is not? And obviously this advice has come out since the statements that I made last week. You know, what are they to do if they need to use public transport and they can't be sure who is vaccinated or not? If there is a requirement still in place for people to wear masks, that could just about give people the confidence to use it. And as I said last week, you have to put yourself in the shoes of people in this position, people who are cancer patients using buses or trams to go for chemo appointments, people going for dialysis using public transport. You know, there's a lot of people out there, 200,000 actually in Greater Manchester, clinically extremely vulnerable from the virus to the virus. And you've got to think first and foremost about them when you're making policy. And as I say, I've heard their voices. I thought the government was going to do a U-turn on Monday, and they didn't. So we now really had to confront the position. And obviously, we were already thinking about going further. Obviously, saw the Mayor of London's statement last night, and now it feels the right thing to do. And actually, by doing it together with my fellow mayors, you know, we think we are bringing much needed clarity to what is a very confusing situation for people, as Dan Jarvis said. So this is an appeal to the public of Greater Manchester. You've supported us so much through this pandemic. You know, when we put the call out, you've rallied to it. You know, we are saying again, this is about protecting those people who are most vulnerable and actually whose lives will be severely impacted actually if things carry on as they are. They feel that they can't go out anymore. That's just not right. We're not a city region that accepts that kind of treatment of people who are in that position. So I do ask people, please listen to what I'm saying and why I'm saying it. Support those people to get out and about still. Wear your mask. It's a minor inconvenience for all of us, but actually it allows us all to reopen next week, and we still want to reopen many things next week, but it allows us to do it with that bit more safety and that bit more reassurance for people who are most at risk.
Yeah, I'll answer the second part of the question, Eunice, which was about frustrating decisions on face coverings by people that we have to work with. And I don't think people fully appreciate just how difficult the public system is in this country, the public transport system is in this country. It is a deregulated bus system, and that's why Sadiq in London can do what he's doing, because that was the only part in the country where the Tories decided not to deregulate. So they have a regulated system, and that means that he has the powers, Sadiq Khan has the powers to do those sort of things. And we've just recently gone through elections where myself and Andy and other mayors got overwhelming mandates for our areas, and yet we don't have the powers to decide on what's the best interest of our local populations on public transport. So you asked about frustration and how difficult it was to convince our train and bus operators. It's obviously proven to be very difficult, and I'll continue to do what I can do. So on the ferries, for instance, and on our estate, we'll be asking for face coverings. But my appeal is to those operators, come and talk to us properly and listen to what our concerns are and see whether we can come to an agreement.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you, Eunice. Next up, I'll just allow the microphone of David Wood from ITV. David, if you could unmute your microphone now, introduce yourself, where you're from, please, and who you'd like to ask your question to. Struggling to unmute your microphone, David. Do I have that right? Okay. If you want to email us your question, I'll see if I can put that to the mayors. If you're not able to unmute your microphone, instead I'll go to Christina from Good Morning Britain. Christina, you should be able to unmute your microphone now and ask your question to the mayor of your choosing. Thanks.
Oh, thanks, Jimmy. I suppose my question first, maybe to Tracy and to Steve. In fact, yeah, Tracy and Steve, is just about how do you react to people who are going to say, well, actually, if you're asking people to wear masks and they don't want to, you're putting that onto the transport staff?
Thank you for that question, Christina. It was something that was very much in the forefront of my mind. because what we don't want to do is put the staff who've worked so hard during this pandemic in a difficult position. Now, we don't have fines. We can't say somebody is going to go to jail or anything for it, but we would engage with people. We would ask them to wear a mask, and if they refuse, then they'll be asked to leave. But it is a matter of persuasion and encouragement as well, because as you say, it has to be across the whole network. And, it's not going to be easy. We do understand that. But I would say, having spoken to the unions, they're behind this decision. The bus operators are going to be strongly encouraging people to wear masks on buses. It does feel like there is a real sense of group agreement across the whole piece. But I just don't have the powers to mandate it specifically. But I don't want to put staff in any situation, of course not. And if somebody is absolutely determined not to wear a mask, then they'll go ahead and not wear it. But I would say, please do think about those vulnerable. And of course, there will be those who are exempt. And as normal, we would encourage them to wear their lanyard or to be able to be seen as to why they're not wearing a mask. But it is about persuasion. It is about making the argument to keep the people of West Yorkshire safe. And I know they'll want to look after each other as they've done over the last few months.
Thanks, Tracy. I suppose that's one thing as we're chatting about it, I would put to all of you, maybe whoever wants to pick this up. Tomorrow, ironically, the Prime Minister is going to lay out his next plans for levelling up. And I look at you all in your positions, and you're all different, what you can do, what you have control over. It's ironic. Like, I suppose, how do you react to that? Steve Rotherham, I see you smiling.
Yeah, because Christine, the timing is really bizarre, isn't it? That he's chosen a date to talk about levelling up when that's exactly what we've been trying to get him to talk about with us for some considerable time. And your question on enforcement is a very real issue for us all. But we're not asking anybody to do something that they're not currently doing. People are doing that today, and people are finding ways in which we can encourage people to continue to wear face coverings. And for me, in our city region, I suppose everybody would say this about their own area, but we have this common spirit, this solidarity and camaraderie, and we're trying to build that collective culture so that, as people have said, if I'm wearing a face mask, I am protecting you. And that's the sort of ethos that we're trying to roll out across the city region on not just this, on everything else. And the government aren't helping us one little bit.
Thank you, Christina, for your question. Does any other mayor want to come in on Christina's latter point, or are we free to move on? Thank you. Okay, I'll then enable the microphone of Liz, who has your hand up. Liz, you should be able to unmute yourself now. Could you introduce yourself and where you're from, please, and ask your question to a mayor?
Yeah, this is Liz Roberts from the BBC in South Yorkshire. My question is for Dan Jarvis. I had the same question actually about enforcement, to be honest with you, because you're talking about just a few interchanges across South Yorkshire. Obviously, the broader message that everyone is getting is that face masks are no longer mandatory. So, how practically do you do that when someone's stepping off a bus into a place that all of a sudden it is mandatory and they don't have one on them, for example? Is it actually going to make that much of a difference, I suppose? And also, do you share the frustrations that your fellow mayors have talked about not having the powers to mandate this on the bus services themselves?
Thank you very much, Liz, for your question. I think Steve and Tracy gave a very comprehensive response, which I completely agree with, in terms of the issues with regard to enforcement. Of course, we'll be doing everything that we possibly can to support our staff over the coming days and weeks to make sure that they are best placed. But I take Steve's point about that sort of ethos across this city region. And as you know very well, it's the same in South Yorkshire. I think the overwhelming majority of people understand that there is a real mutual benefit from wearing face coverings. And my experience, having dealt with many people over the last sort of year or so, is that the overwhelming majority will behave sensibly and responsibly. Again, as Steve said, we're not asking people to do anything that they're not currently doing. And the feedback that I've had today has been overwhelmingly positive. Liz, I would just make one other point, because I thought there was a really important question that's just been asked about levelling up. The Prime Minister is due to give a speech on levelling up tomorrow in the Midlands. Now, I would just say that collectively, as a group of mayors, we work very closely together, and we want to work with the Prime Minister, who of course has been a mayor, on the levelling up agenda. The north of England will not be levelled up unless there is a close working relationship between national government and mayoral combined authorities. So we do need the Prime Minister to engage with us, to sit down around the table, whether that is virtual or not, and talk about how we can work together to level up the country. And we've extended that offer to the Prime Minister. He gave an undertaking that he would meet with us, but has so far not been able to give us a date. And I hope that tomorrow he will indicate a strong willingness to work closely with the mayors and understand the huge value that we can add to the levelling up agenda. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you, Dan. Could I just ask the mayors on the call, just if you're not speaking, to mute yourselves, if that's okay, just to minimise any echo that there might be when others are speaking. Thanks so much. But I'm going to unmute the microphone now of Jessica Hay. Jessica, you should be able to unmute yourself, introduce yourself and ask your question of a mayor. Thank you.
Thanks, Jimmy. Yeah, Jessica Hay from Manchester TV. My question is for Andy, please. So we know where you stand and how you feel about face masks remaining mandatory when it comes to public transport. But when do you think will be the right time to remove them as a requirement, or do you think for many it will just become the norm and they will continue to use them indefinitely, especially those who are clinically vulnerable?
Thanks, Jessica. So I think we need to first focus on what's coming on Monday. You know, this is a big step that we're all taking. There is much more reopening taking place, and we have the strong feeling here that we need to do that as safely as possible and keep building confidence as we reopen. And as far as I'm concerned, masks are a minor inconvenience to build that confidence collectively amongst us all that we're protecting the health and safety of everybody as we move towards a lifting of the restrictions. I'll say I've not this year disagreed with the government's roadmap until this point, where they've kind of got to this point and lifted everything. I still think we should be in a phase where we're making it clear to the public that we're in a pandemic, that we have obviously rising case levels around the country. And although not the same as last year, but rising levels of hospitalisation, you know, that is a moment not to remove everything, in my view. Now, you could look forward to the point where all adults, or let's say 85% of adults, are double jabbed, because that seemed to be the sort of, you know, the point at which we've reached, you know, a sort of a tipping point. So that could be one point at which this could be reviewed. I also have said, and I'll indicate it again, there are practical challenges with this, because it's not the same as having it mandated nationally. We are going to have to keep this under review. But you know what I'd say to the people of Greater Manchester is, you know, we are going to do this carefully. We are doing it for the right reasons, and we would not want it to be done for a minute longer than we need to. Nobody's enjoying particularly wearing their mask. But to pick up, I think, a point Tracy made really powerfully, you know, this is an act of solidarity. I think Steve is making this point too. It's an act of solidarity. We're a city that completely is built on that principle, where it's not just yourself you look out for, you look out for others all the time. And, you know, I don't have to say that to people, because that is how the place works. It's how the place thinks. So, you know, I think it's still this position where people think a mask is about protecting themselves, and the government, I think, by talking about Freedom Day and individual responsibility and all of that, it's kind of reinforced the sense that the mask is just your own choice and it doesn't affect anybody else. But that isn't the case. You know, this is an airborne virus. If you know, when you breathe out in an enclosed space and you're positive, that is putting others at risk, and that's why the mask is so important. So I think people will know why I'm doing this. I think the majority of people in the city region will support it. And I would just say, let's make this a Manchester thing, a Greater Manchester thing. Let's show the rest of the country that we are taking each other's health seriously. And as we reopen on Monday, let's make a show of mask wearing so that that message goes out really clearly that we are reopening, but we're doing it by looking after the health of every single one of our residents. And we're not going to accept that a single person should be sitting at home excluded because of this, kind of throwing away of this requirement too early.
Thank you, Andy. And that's it for television journalists' questions. Can I ask, because I know when newspapers go to print, can I ask colleagues from the media now to raise your hand if you have questions? I'll give you a moment to do that. And by raising your hand, I'll come to you shortly. So colleagues from newspapers or news websites, please. Super stuff. Thanks very much. First, I will just allow the microphone of Jen Williams. Jen, you should be able to unmute yourself now. If you could introduce yourself, please, and where you're from, and ask your question to a mayor. Thank you.
Hi. Is it working? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Hi. Yeah. Jen Williams, Manchester Evening News. So at a council meeting earlier today, Sir Richard Leese said that making this mandatory on trams could, and I quote, put staff at risk of people who might react badly. I wondered whether you agreed with that, because clearly this is now being brought in. Secondly, is this being brought in as a direct result of Sadiq Khan making that decision last night? And would you have done it anyway if Sadiq Khan hadn't made that decision? And I just wondered if I could get an updated view on the position in the hospitals here. Just because obviously this week you haven't got your regular press conference and things are clearly under an awful lot of pressure, and I wondered whether you thought that the hospital system was coping at the moment. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. I'm guessing those are mainly aimed at me, and I'll take.
Sorry, I can only see you on screen. I'm really sorry to everyone else.
Oh, sorry. Right. Okay. No worries. No problem. So on the first point, of course, Sir Richard is making an important point, and just as Tracy said before, it's one that we've been thinking about as well. I guess the way to describe what's being done here is its continuity. So we're not asking staff on our trams to do anything that they haven't been doing, over recent months. So it's many ways, we're not asking them to do more than they've been doing. We're asking them obviously to remind people to wear a mask. We have been in contact today with Unite, the union, who represent many of the staff on our Metrolink system, and they are in full support of what we're proposing. And Sir Richard and I have discussed it, and while we will watch that issue carefully, and we will, and that's why we're saying we'll keep this under review. There's a concern about protecting staff, and we'll always be serious about that. But if we were not to act, there would be a concern about people who are vulnerable being forced off the public transport system, and obviously that's the basis upon which we are acting, because we're not prepared to see that happen. With regard to the timeline for the decision making, no, it wasn't prompted solely by what was going on in London. We were waiting for Monday's announcement from the government, and while it inched us forward, it didn't go far enough. On Tuesday morning, having done some media interviews, I asked the team here to start preparing for a decision on this issue, and I was starting to canvass opinion with other people, including our leaders. And as part of that, we contacted Sadiq's team, and we realised that they were in a similar position a bit further down the line. So obviously we've been sharing information with them, and we both agreed it was the right thing to do. So in many ways, it was a sort of sharing of our joint thinking about it and where we'd reach following the government's announcements. And then obviously in the wake of that, we think it strengthened the case for doing it. And it's really pleasing. When I spoke to Tracy this morning, she was in the same position, Steve in a similar position, and obviously you've heard from all the other mayors as well. So I think we've been all watching the evolution of this issue, as well as hearing the voices of people within our city regions, who are most at risk from the change on Monday. As I say, it will be a day of anxiety for many people if things stay as they are. We can give people more assurance about the tram, but obviously we can't give the same level of assurance about the rest of the transport system, although we really do implore the Greater Manchester public to respect the same discipline on all modes of transport come Monday. And then finally on the hospital system, yeah, of course we are concerned about the position. I was saying earlier in this press conference that we're not seeing the same link between the virus and hospitalisation as we were seeing earlier this year, or certainly not in 2020. However, as you've reported, there are other patients returning to hospital for other reasons, and obviously with the reopening comes that traditional pressure on A&E. When we have Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night just gone, there is pressure returning to the hospital system that is the usual pressure, alongside the additional pressure from COVID. So we are concerned about the position in our hospitals. The decision I've just announced today with regard to Metrolink is strongly supported by our directors of public health and many colleagues in the NHS who were in touch with me asking me to make this particular move, if nothing else, to send that strong message out that we are still in a pandemic. Yes, we are concerned, and this move is as much about supporting the NHS as it is about supporting the residents of Greater Manchester who are most at risk from the changes coming on Monday.
Thank you, Jen. We did have a journalist earlier who wasn't able to unmute, and that was David Wood, the political correspondent from ITV West. So I thought I'd ask his question, which he has emailed in. And this is for Dan Norris. Mr. Norris, much of the region borders on Wales, where the rules stay, and in England the government says it's time to trust the people. Should you not trust the people of the West to make the right choice next week?
Well, I think the vast majority of people are going to be sensible, and I think they will heed the Metro Mayor's and requests and other people in health issues, health areas, and other prominent people who are saying wearing a mask is sensible and the safe thing to do. But I think there will be some individuals who will clearly not do the sensible thing. We know that when we don't have a pandemic, there are some people who do all sorts of things on public transport or in different places where they just exercise their rights to do whatever. But I think given the safety concerns of the pandemic, it's really, really important that we do impress upon everybody that we are all much safer, that we all look after one another by doing the right thing, not just ourselves. And that is the right thing to do while we're still in a pandemic. Let's not forget we're still in it. It's still happening. Numbers are going up every day. There may not be the number of deaths, but there's long COVID to deal with that many people are going to get if we don't act safely. There's a whole lot of other consequences. We're all eager to get back to normal. We're all eager to see trade and business and social events and all the rest of it carrying on and happening as soon as possible like they used to. But we all want to do that, or the vast majority of us want to do that, knowing that it's safe. And I see in my constituency of the west of England, confidence ebbing because the government's messaging has not been clear. One minute they're saying that people should exercise choice, and then they're saying that they will personally be wearing masks. And it's that inconsistency that's creating anxiety. And that's why we as Metro Mayors today have got together to say what we feel, because we feel duty bound to talk up for our communities, because we think it's in their interests and what they want.
Thank you, Dan. So the next question will be from Pippa Crerar. Pippa, I should be able to unmute yourself now, I hope. If you could just introduce yourself and where you're from and ask your question to a mayor, please. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Pippa Crerar from the Daily Mirror. I just wondered whether any of you have had any indication from anybody in government, whether that's officials or indeed ministers, that they could yet change their minds, even if it's only about avoiding this sort of mixed messaging that you've all talked about. Andy, you mentioned that you thought on Monday that they were going to go further. And if that doesn't happen, will you continue to try and persuade them, or are the political odds stacked against you?
Oh, Tracy, you.
Sure, just very quickly, we saw, didn't we, today Grant Shapps getting behind Sadiq Khan. So it does feel to me as if potentially there is going to be a shift in government, because once you get that wave of ministers coming out and agreeing, I think is something that does gather ahead of steam. But if I could just say what the difficulty for us is fundamentally on Monday, numbers are going to be unrestricted on trains and buses. and yet mask wearing is going to drop away. In West Yorkshire, 4,326 people have died from COVID. This is a medical intervention as well. We don't want anyone else in West Yorkshire to suffer that grief from losing a loved one from COVID. But we're hoping that this intervention will be persuasive. I don't have a hotline, unfortunately, to number 10. I wish I had. But I hope that this public intervention will be part of that pressure on government to make them hopefully do the right thing for the public. If you wanted to add, Andy, sorry, I cut across you.
No, you didn't at all. Not at all, Tracy. But I'll jump in and just add a little, if that's okay. We were picking up last weekend, Pippa, that there would be some movement. And obviously then we saw that hinted at on Sunday and then confirmed by the Prime Minister on Monday. And while it was progress, it didn't go far enough, because, you know, if you're saying to the public, we expect and recommend that face coverings should be worn, is that enough of a guarantee to somebody who is that cancer patient going for chemo, or that kidney patient going for dialysis? Is that enough of a guarantee for that person then to say, I will now, you know, I feel that there will be enough people wearing masks on public transport? I don't think it is. And that's why I think this policy still isn't in the right place. And this isn't about, you know, us saying, oh, you know, for political reasons, a government U-turn. I think no one would criticise the government if they then tonight said, OK, we hear what you're saying. We recognise that this would help matters if we just kept this in place. We would all say, well, correct decision, and there'd be there's no need to make any politics out of it. You know, we're all in a pandemic. Things change. You know, it would just be the right thing to do. Just to add to what I've said today, we've seen the opening of the new terminal at Manchester Airport today, and it's important for me just to add that the airport had decided to mandate face coverings within the new terminal building, recognising, I think, that most airlines are mandating them on services. So, you know, the risk is here that it's, you know, we kind of move into quite a piecemeal approach. And it's still better if it was to be done in a more consistent way at a national level. But if it isn't going to be done in that consistent way, I come back to the point Dan Jarvis made. We are still bringing more clarity to the situation by doing what we're doing and what we've announced on this call today.
Thank you. Dan, you had your hand up, Mr. Dan Jarvis.
Well, Pippa, just to make a very short point, given the millions of people that collectively we represent, and the responsibilities we have when it comes to public transport, I would just make the point that whilst we will always want to engage with national government and with government departments, we would expect them to apply the same courtesy to us. So I do think that national government decision making would be greatly improved if, on issues such as this, they were to work a little bit more closely with the mayors, maybe even to consult us and ask us what we think. Because if they had have done that, I think that we would be in a much better position collectively than currently we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you, Pippa, for your question. So now I'll turn to Daniel Holland. Daniel, you should be able to unmute your microphone, introduce yourself, where you're from, and ask your question, please.
Hi, Dan Holland from the Newcastle Chronicle. Just a question for Jamie Driscoll. Jamie, while you say that masks are going to remain compulsory on the Tyne and Wear Metro, having spoken to them today, the reality is that people who don't wear a mask aren't going to be denied access, unlike in London, where they do have some specialist enforcement staff there who can enforce that rule. So do you think that effectively just encouraging rather than mandating people to wear a mask once it's no longer the law is going to be sufficient to protect people, especially given the fact that infection rates in the northeast are so high at the moment?
Cheers, Dan. Every public health official says that wearing masks is going to reduce the spread of coronavirus. We don't have the powers to enforce things. It's entirely unreasonable to think that whether it's metro drivers or bus drivers, that they're going to stop their vehicles, get out the cab and start walking up and down policing these things. It's not their job. That's why it requires the government to make this compulsory. Everybody understands it's an easy thing to do. We're all used to it. We're all wearing masks. We all have masks. It's not a big ask. It will keep people safe. And it's about time the government just acknowledged the basic truth of this and reversed their position.
Thank you, Dan, for your question. So I'll now turn, conscious that we're approaching 6 o'clock, I'll now turn to colleagues from the radio and any other media that may wish to ask questions. Can I ask you just to raise your hand at this point, please? Super stuff, thank you. I'll just enable the microphone of Hannah Norbury. Hannah, you should be able to unmute yourself now. If you could introduce yourself, where you're from, and ask your question of a mayor, please.
Hi, Hannah here from Greatest Hits Radio. I've got a question for our local mayor, Tracy Brabin. I know it was discussed earlier about this patchwork protection of mask wearing causing confusion for people. Will this in fact make it less likely for people to wear one?
Well, thank you for your question. I'm hoping not, because I really do get that sense that the people of West Yorkshire who have just gone through so much will hopefully be motivated and encouraged to continue what they're doing, what they were doing 2 days ago, in order to protect others and to try and get that message across that sometimes it's hard to know someone's vulnerability, but if they're crushed up against you on a crowded train or in a crowded bus, that potentially they could catch COVID. And as I said earlier on, the numbers of people we've lost due to COVID, it does seem, we're so near the end with vaccinations. This is all we can do as mayors and leaders, because the government haven't mandated, is to do what we can where we can, and then where there are gaps, encourage the operators and the unions and others to have that combined voice. And let's not forget, this isn't even a party political issue. As you've seen probably this afternoon, that Andy Street, the mayor of the West Midlands, has also come out saying that he would encourage mask wearing as well. So I'm hoping that everybody in West Yorkshire will understand that they're doing this for others, not necessarily for themselves. And if it was their mum or their dad, that they would want others to keep them safe. So I'm hoping this intervention will be motivating and inspiring, and it won't be long, but just for the next few weeks until we get a better lie of the land, just to see how things have rolled out with the numbers of cases rising. Let's just keep focused, keep going, and support each other across West Yorkshire.
Thank you, Hannah. And then the final question is from Michael Gaffney. Michael, you should be able to unmute yourself now. Please introduce yourself and where you're from and ask your question of a mayor. Thank you.
Michael Gaffney, LBC. Just a question for Mayor Jamie. Could you just give us a bit more info on how the masks mandate for the Tyne and Wear Metro will work? Because when the trains head south of the river, I guess it's not your jurisdiction anymore.
Hi there, Michael. Just wait for the spotlight to pop up there. Working our way through.
We can see.
The Tyne and Wear Joint Transport, the North East Joint Transport Committee is what looks after the Tyne and Wear Metro. So we work together, both the north of the Tyne and the south of the Tyne, to manage that system. At the JTC meeting yesterday, everybody agreed this. That's why it's been announced today. We've written to the Prime Minister outlining our position, saying that he needs to intervene to make sure that this is made mandatory and not just the conditions of carriage. I'm not going to go into the legals of it, but the management of the system, everybody concerned, is agreed on this.
Thank you. And that was the final question from colleagues from the media. So unless Andy, for example, would you have anything you'd like to say?
Well, thanks, Jimmy, and thanks all colleagues in the media for attending. We appreciate your interest in what we're saying, and I hope this evening the degree of common ground amongst all of the mayors on this call does say something to you, that we are working hard to protect our residents as we come through this stage of the pandemic, and we're united in doing that. And actually, we don't want to be in conflict with the government. We want to, as Tracy was just saying, work with them and find also common ground with them. So it would help. I think it would help everybody if there was a change of heart at the national level. So that there was much more clarity across the system. Steve has spoken about the challenges that he's got. The truth is, we're all in a difficult position here. None of us is saying that this is going to be easy. We're all trying to act where we can, but it's not an easy thing to do, and we'll all be keeping what we're doing under review. But I think what you can see here is the power of devolution. Imagine if we all had a substantial package of powers to run transport properly in our city regions. That's what we need going forward, and we hope the Prime Minister will address that in his levelling up speech tomorrow, because this country, I think, is now seeing the benefits of devolution. It's right that local areas can act in a way that's right for the people who live there. And we need now to move in the same direction as other countries around the world, where there is more power at the regional and local level to take decisions that are right for those places. So we'll thank you all for your attendance. We would be grateful if you could get the message out about what we've announced, because we do need the public to understand what we've just announced, so that they are clear about what is being asked of them come Monday. But with that, I'm just going to thank my fellow mayors for joining me this evening. Thank all of you in the media for joining us, and we will see you all soon. Thank you very much.